Well, hello there. I'm sure you're wondering why I called you all here today. You're probably wondering, what's this? What's with the new getup, the external microphone? Everything sounds and looks better. I am a consumer of media, just like I'm sure everyone else is. I love movies, music, video games, TV shows, though music is my bread and butter. And that's what the bulk of this video is going to be. I listened to 27 albums this month, and with the exception of one, I will rank them all in order from worst to best. The one that I'm gonna leave unranked is because it was made by a friend, and ranking and reviewing a friend's piece of art just doesn't feel right, but I will definitely give it a shout out. Now, the way this is going to work is I'm gonna go ahead and do the ranking, but in between every 5 or 10 entries, I'm gonna take a little break where I talk about the video games I played, which this month there were 2, and then I'll eventually talk about the YouTube channel I want to give the shout out to. Let's get this started, shall we? Unranked. In Catharsis Extremis, Isolators. You probably have several questions like, who made it? And what type of music is it? And what is that thing fucking staring at me, and why do I want it to stop? Well, to answer those questions, first off, this is my friend Nick's band. He used to be my bassist back in the days when I was in a band called Ocean Void. Second off, they say they're shoegaze, but if you ask me, it sounds like a love child between Joy Division and Smashing Pumpkins. And lastly, that thing staring at you, it's called Doof Mouse. And no, you're not getting a better explanation than that. But check these guys out. I'll include a link in the description for their YouTube channel as well as their Spotify. Number 26. Oh, what's that? A big sigh of relief because that thing isn't staring at you anymore. Oh, don't worry. I can fix that. There we go. Now you can see Doof Mouse in all of his glory for the rest of this video. Anyways, number 26 is Metal Machine Music by Lou Reed. Yeah, I know, going for the real low-hanging fruit for the worst album of the month, right? This is one of the most infamous albums ever. And the reason why I'm including it here is because, yes, I did genuinely listen to it this month, but also I needed something bad to put up against everything else because everything else is in the C tier or higher. What's the point if everything is at least average or good in quality? We need something bad to bitch about, don't we? Now, I've tried to listen to this thing a number of times over the past decade and a half that I've been into this type of music, and for me, I can't get behind it. I know that there's people that love this thing, and people that absolutely despise it, other people that think it's just a joke. Back in 1975, Lou Reed was two things. One, he was very angry at his record label, and 2, he was very high on heroin. Now, a lot of people like to say that all he did was just put his guitar up against the amplifier and record the effects for an hour, but that's not accurate. There's method to the madness, but for me, the changes are just so minuscule and ignorable that I don't find myself doing anything besides falling asleep when I try to listen to this thing. I mean, I'm not a noise guy to begin with, but even the best noise out there tries to change things up every now and then. With the exception of some cool sounding bleeps and bloops, I can't really say as though there's anything interesting going on here. But some lunatics like this thing, and some of those lunatics went on to make noise rock and shoegazing albums, and I gotta be thankful for that. Therefore, it gets a D. Just so that way you guys know, all the recommended tracks from these albums are going to be in a Spotify playlist, which I will include a link to in the description below. Number 25, Heartbeat City, The Cars. Let me make this clear, I am a fan of that first self-titled Cars record, definitely one of the best all-American rock albums. And there are some fine gems here. All of the singles are fantastic, but that's because they're still standard classic Cars hits. It's whenever they decide to get completely synthy and 80s, which doesn't actually work for them. There's some moments on here where someone's using the most obnoxious setting on their Casio, and all I can think is, yup, that's definitely a song from the 80s, alright. Which is a shame, because tracks like Looking for Love is a nice, bubbly, fun time. There's the classic Drive, which everyone knows if you listen to the Cars. But most of the tracks on here are just trying to sound edgy and cool in a 1980s sense, and it just does not work for the Cars. C. Number 24, The Psychedelic Furs, Mirror Moves. I'm sure all of you love sandwiches, right? And what matters is the ingredients inside the sandwich. And of course, we all like 2 good pieces of bread that go in between it. But think of this, if this album were a sandwich, the 2 pieces of bread are absolutely delicious, state-of-the-art slices of bread, but someone just put a bunch of slices of Oscar Mayer bologna in between the 2 slices. Sure, it's not necessarily bad, it's edible, but if that's the type of stuff you're gonna put inside a gourmet sandwich, why bother? Ghost in You is a fantastic song, one of the best songs of the 1980s. I highly recommend it. And of course, it ends on the fantastic Highwire days. But all the songs in between are kind of these weird little awkward attempts to sound like a funky 80s band. And look, if you were gonna do funk in the 80s, you either had to be the Chili Peppers or you had to have been doing like actual funk, not trying to mix new wave with it. Unless you're the Talking Heads. The Talking Heads got away with fucking everything. And what's up with that weird fluffy production on here? It's like, I get that the Furs are like known for their more lush instrumentations, but this album doesn't really have all that many moments like that. I don't know, it just mostly doesn't work. It wasn't annoying like the Cars record, but I found myself enjoying even less tracks. C+. Number 23, The Wallflowers, Red Letter Days. I forgot to mention in the intro that I reviewed every single Wallflowers album for this. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. They were my first favorite band ever, and this thing here is their worst album. But being in the C tier, that's a good sign, because some bands' worst albums are way lower than this. The early 2000s was a strange time to be an alt-rock band that gained your stardom in the mid to late 90s. Due to changing landscapes, you had basically 3 choices. You could either stick to your guns and hope for some level of commercial success or critical acclaim, become edgier and try to give in to the type of sounds that would have appealed to Nickelback, Puddle of Mud, and Creed fans, or you could have tried to pull a Radiohead and electronicize your sound. What did the Wallflowers decide to do? All 3. And how does it work? It kind of works. The problem is that the direction of this album is all over the place. It's trying to pull you in so many different spots that it's just like, pick a fucking lane. I'm tired of trying to figure out what you guys are trying to do. The other big issue with this album is that Jakob Dylan's lyrics are cheesier and cornier than they ever have been. And I know that Jakob is kind of well known for his cheesy, corny lyrics, but we're not talking about lines like, "Those days before I met you, girl, were just ice cream running down on the shoes of my world." No, we're talking about, "Baby, if you never got sick, I wouldn't get to hold you." This is the same man who rode One Headlight, goddammit. That being said, there are some touching moments on here, and even with all of the weird, awkward lyrics, the band's at least trying to do something good here. C+. Number 22, Randy Newman, Sail Away. Speaking of giant fucking doofballs. This album was recommended to me by my best friend and former channel collaborator, Trey. Now, Trey is a fan of piano-playing singer-songwriter types, and Newman is one of his all-time favorites. And while Trey and I can usually agree on Ben Folds and Elton John, when he recommended Randy fucking Newman to me, I was just all like, "You mean the Pixar guy?" Well, it turns out that Randy Newman is one of the most celebrated American composers of the late 20th century, and his fame went far back before Pixar. What we have here are some biting commentary lyrics that make you go, "Yeah, I agree with you, man." Some stellar old-timey traditional jazz tunes, some emotional moments that make you say, "Yeah, man, I feel that." Some revolutionary kind of cabaret-sounding jazz that Tom Waits would later explore. But there's something holding it back for me, and that's Randy Newman's doofy fucking voice. Just like I'm sure there's people that can't stand to hear the sound of me speak, I can't stand to hear the sound of Randy Newman sing. No matter how good the composition, no matter how excellent and witty the lyrics, I'm sorry, that voice is never gonna sell it for me. I gotta give credit where credit's due, because that man does have a lot of talent and he is considered extremely important, but unfortunately for me, this album gets a B-. Number 21, The Stranglers, No More Heroes. The Stranglers were one of the many post-punk bands to come out of Britain in the late 1970s. These guys have elements of punk, goth rock, and of course some Joy Division-esque bassy parts. And while I definitely appreciated the biting commentary on here, I'm not gonna lie, there were times I was laughing along with the lyrics. My problem with most punk albums, and this album does lean more towards the punk side of post-punk, is that a lot of the songs start to sound the same after a while. But there are plenty of punk albums that I love, and I didn't hate this thing. When the most memorable track on the album is the 7-minute long dirgy School Ma'am, you know you're dealing with an album that definitely is screaming for more variety. B-. Alright, break time. Let's talk about one of them video games that I finished, and that would be Pikmin 4. Now, something I haven't gotten to talk about on this channel is that I am a gigantic Pikmin fan. For those of you wondering, the second game used to be my favorite in the series. 1 is just too nail-bitingly stressful for me, and 3 doesn't have as many collectibles as 2. And that's the thing, I like to play my Pikmin games nice, slow, methodical, relaxing, which I'm sure some of you hardcore real-time strategy game fans are just like, no, you need the pressure, otherwise you're not getting the most bang for your buck out of it. Look, I'm sorry. I like playing comfy games, okay? I'm a Stardew Valley type of guy. I'm gonna try to make Pikmin as relaxing as possible. At least as relaxing as I can until that fucking steamroller thing comes flying at me. Overall, I think it's the best game in the series. Ochi is a great addition and doesn't make the game too easy, and it has some improvements over previous games in the series while integrating some of the things that made those games so classic to begin with. Overall, I just gotta give it an S tier. I love it. I'll be visiting it many more times for years to come. Now, on with the music. Number 20, the Wallflowers, Glad All Over. There's a big gap between the worst Wallflowers album and the rest of them. Most of these are pretty standard run-of-the-mill blues rock albums, and by that I mean it's still good run-of-the-mill blues rock. This is probably their most adventurous album though. See, fans were left waiting 7 long years between the previous release and this one. And what we got was the Wallflowers trying to sound 2010s. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We get Mick Jones from The Clash on a couple of tracks trying to push the band in a musical direction that you're not expecting. My problem is that some of these songs are just good and not necessarily great. And you're gonna find that to be a common complaint with me and the Wallflowers albums, with the exception of a couple of them which are just stellar albums. Jacob Dylan sounds like he's phoning it in a little bit. I would even go as far as to say that this is his worst vocal performance. Maybe not his worst lyrics, but definitely doesn't sound like he wants to be there. It's got cool adventurous moments on here, and I do recommend it to somebody that's liked other Wallflowers albums, but there's better places to start. B. Number 19, the Wallflowers, Rebel Sweethearts. For the album that had to follow up Red Letter Days, you would expect this band to be insistent and try to keep going down that route, but no, they actually returned back to basics a little bit. Just a little bit, because there's still some level of adventure here. We're now out of Lamesville, USA, and Jacob Dylan has actually tried to put some more heart and soul into the lyrics. Sonically, this thing is a wall of sound, which is not something that you're generally used to with the Wallflowers. Very lush production and some tug at your heartstring moments with these lyrics. Just look up the track How Far You've Come and try not to tear up a little bit. This is Wallflowers going into uplifting territory the right way. Also, they took out the electronic elements and all the attempts to try to cater to the hard rock crowd, so I gotta be thankful for that. B. Roxy Music, Flesh Plus Blood, or Flesh and Blood if you prefer. Oh yeah, I am a Roxy Music fan. Consider me a Roxy Music connoisseur. I like a good chunk of the Roxy Music albums. Oh yeah, including that one called Avalon. And of course I like the proto-punk stuff as well. Roxy Music has a pretty good round of albums going for them. But after Brian Eno left them, they kind of struggled to find their footing again. And this is the album that came right before Avalon, the album that they're probably most well known for. And I gotta say, it's pretty good. It's showing that transition between the old sound and the new sound. The only problem is that it does get a little yacht rocky here and there. Yacht rock isn't necessarily a bad genre, but it's rarely high art. We're not quite into the depths that would bring us to Avalon just yet, but we're starting to show our footing, and I gotta recommend it because of that. B+. Number 17, Architecture Morality by Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, aka OMD. This thing is pretty stellar with it being an early 80s synth pop album. The vocals on here, whether they're done by members of the band or by guest musicians, are all pretty good. And that production is just jaw-dropping. You would think this thing came from the mid-80s, not the early 80s. But OMD, what they did is they embraced what they had. And they knew how to do it tastefully. They didn't go with the most obnoxious keyboard settings just because they're like, hey, look what we got. My issue is this thing does get just a little too artsy for its own good. And I know there's people out there that love artsy, atmospheric, ambient type of synth music, but for me, this just doesn't quite reach the heights that it does for others, but it is a pretty excellent listen still. B+. Number 16, They Might Be Giants, Apollo 18. This was recommended to me by my hippie friend Marshall, who likes his music with tight musicianship and with heavy as balls production. And I do happen to like They Might Be Giants quite a little bit, but I've only really listened to Flood and not much else. I do appreciate the humorous lyrics and the little jabs and, like I said, the extremely fucking tight musicianship on here. The guitar is probably one of the coolest songs of the 1990s, but overall, this thing just screams nerd rock. There's too many obscure references here and too much going on at once for me to completely fall in love with it. It's a decent album with some stellar laugh out loud moments, but all I can give it is a B+. Number 15, Bringing Down the Horse by the Wallflowers. Alright, time for me to really peeve off the Wallflowers enthusiasts. How many times have you seen this on lists of the greatest albums of the 1990s? A handful of times, right? But not super frequently. The people that love this thing like to say that this was a revolution in the 1990s. The continuation of what Kurt Cobain started. Which couldn't be further from the truth because the two bands are completely sonically different. But it was supposed to be the step in the right direction because pop music felt directionless after the suicide of Kurt Cobain. And who else but the son of Bob Dylan could carry the mantle? Back in 1997, I was a wee lad watching VH1 with his family. It was the top 20 video countdown. I don't know exactly what week it was. I'm sure some obsessive weirdo will try to figure it out. But I remember it was counting things down and my dad was explaining to me how countdowns work, that the number one song was the best. I didn't know that it was just whatever music videos were getting the most votes or selling the most. But you know, dipshit 7-year-old's gonna be a dipshit 7-year-old. And I was determined that whatever was number one was going to be the greatest piece of music ever recorded. And we're going through the Spice Girls, Natalie Imbruglia, Meredith Brooks. And finally we get to number 2, and my dad says, time to go, and pushes the record button on the VCR, sets it for 10 minutes, and says that we're gonna go see a movie. I don't remember what movie we went to go see, sorry. So I didn't get to see what was number 1, and I didn't care about the movie we went to go see, because I wanted to know what the number 1 hit song was, god damn it. So we got home, my mom was trying to put me to bed, but I wouldn't shut the heck up because I was an annoying little 7-year-old. I wanted to know what was number 1. So finally, she sat me down, said, fine, but after this, you gotta promise to go to bed. So I sat down, I watched it, and on came One Headlight by the Wallflowers at number 1. And I sat there, captivated, my brain not able to comprehend the lyrics, pondering between life and death, but definitely enjoying the intensity in the blues guitar, the dark, dingy tones. You would believe that this song was a revolution when it came out, and it's still a beloved alt-rock classic, with many still saying it's one of the best alt-rock songs ever written, and it's the first song on the album. So when you listen to that and you follow it up with 6th Avenue Heartache, you start thinking, god damn, this thing is going to be a classic. Because 6th Avenue Heartache, with its backing vocals from the guy from Counting Crows, god damn it, I can't remember his name, and just the heartfelt lyrics and instrumentation, you're buying it. You're thinking that this is going to be one of the best albums of the 90s. And then the rest of the album happens. And for most of the time, it's just doing that. happening. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still some other good songs on here. The Difference is another single which you can bang your head to. Angel on My Bike makes me wish I had an angel on my bike, goddammit. But unfortunately, a lot of these songs are just generic blues pop. Yeah, blues pop. It's not even really blues rock necessarily, and it just fails to meet its potential, which is weird because, as you're probably gonna notice, the album that came before this ranked a lot higher than this. If it was able to keep up the momentum from the first two tracks, we would have been dealing with a game changer here. I know some people do see it as the classic that you think it's gonna be after the first two songs, but I just happen to disagree. B+. Number 14, the Wallflowers, Exit Wounds. The most recent Wallflowers album is, in my book, their third best. Here, we return even more to basics than we did on prior records. This is if like the style of the weaker tracks off of Bringing Down the Horse had a little bit more substance to them. There's nothing life-changing on here, there's still just mostly the Wallflowers flair that we've gotten to know, with the exception of some really good backing vocals from Shelby Lynn. There's not a whole lot of female backing vocals, at least not since the first album. And again, Jacob Dylan using some pulling at your heartstrings with some really emotional lyrics here. There's some songs that pull in a different direction, including some calypso, which I was surprised to hear. And Jacob Dylan vocally is back in his A game, a step up from the previous album. If you want a good entryway that isn't one of the two albums that are coming up, give this one a shot. B+. Number 13, Soccer Mommy, Color Theory. This album was recommended to me by my friend Kelly, who I used to be in a music project with, which never got anywhere, and I hope someday to work with her again because she's a pretty amazing piano player. Soccer Mommy is one of those sad girl artists, very much of the same ilk as Phoebe Bridgers and Boy Genius, but where those other artists play up the theatrics, which I do love regardless, Soccer Mommy has a more subdued approach. Also, she likes her shoegazy guitar textures like nobody's business. There's still plenty of heart-wrenching lyrics on here about trauma, heartache, having to deal with the bullshit of men, but where Phoebe Bridgers has more in common with Jeff Buckley and being just completely theatrical and emotional, Soccer Mommy has more of an Elliott Smith going for her, and that's not a bad thing, it's just not my cup of tea. It's just a lot more brooding and calm. Consider this a very strong recommendation if everything I've described to you appeals to you. B+. Number 12, Visage. This is a pretty excellent dance record. It was considered part of the new romantic era coming out of Britain in the late 1970s and early 80s. There's some excellent melodies on here, some banger tracks I would love to hear on the dance floor at an 80s dance party. The only slight flaws I can think of is that sometimes it does sound a little hollow when they're not playing around with the full scope of the sonic range that they could have gone for. But that being said, don't sleep on this. This is clearly a classic if you're into this type of music. A-. Number 11, Elton John's Madman Across the Water. This one was recommended to me by my karaoke host, Dang. We get along great. If you want proof, here's a picture of him flipping me off after I told him to go fuck himself. Man, the early Elton John albums were not necessarily bad, but he was still trying to find his footing. This is the first step towards the Elton John that we would learn to love. With classic tracks such as Tony Danza and Elon. Wait, no, it's Tiny Dancer and Yvonne. I'm sorry, I keep accidentally thinking it's called Elon thanks to Dusty Smith and his little He Shall Be Elon thing. Elton started to mature as a composer, actually exploring longer, thicker songs. Songs with more lyrical depth than he was used to prior to this. There are some growing pains going on here, but for the most part, this is a pretty stellar record, and it shows what Elton John would be capable of doing as the years went on. Very easy, A-. Fuck you, Dang. Alright, second break time. Let's talk about that other video game. As you guys may or may not know, I am a fan of old school style first-person shooters. We're talking Wolf 3D, the original Doom, Quake, and this second game of the month has a whole lot in common with OG Quake with a lot more horror elements. Yep, we're talking about Dusk, baby. Yeah, I know the game is several years old. I'm behind the times, okay? I don't talk about new media a whole lot. Imagine you're dropped in the town of dusk, there is madness going on. Religious nut jobs floating all over the place, screaming, heretic, and non-believer, before firing fireballs at you, putting your life in jeopardy. It is up to you to have to fight off all these evil cultists and demons. And goddammit, there are so many jump scares here. I had a blast with this game. For the most part, there were a couple of levels that kind of frustrated the shit out of me. The one where you're in close corridors for most of the time, having to go through those tight tunnels with very little visual cue towards where you are. Moments where your flashlight breaks, you have no idea where you are, and you have to kind of use guesswork to figure out how to proceed. And most frustratingly, and this should be a good mechanic, but unfortunately it didn't work here, the level where you had to constantly change the direction of gravity. Yeah, that took me like fucking 3 hours to get through because I kept getting lost. For the most part, this game's a banger. I highly recommend it if you're into old school first-person shooters. A-. Number 10, Aztec Camera, High Land, High Rain. Aztec Camera are one of the most cherished Glaswegian bands out there, just under the Blue Nile, likely. This thing has some eclectic, stellar guitar work, ranging from jazzy to classical to Spanish to poppy. I would say it's probably got some of the best guitar work out of any album I've listened to this month. There's also songs on here that I didn't realize I'd heard before, such as Walk Out to Winter and Oblivious. These guys are definitely underappreciated in this day and age. This is just a sweeping, enjoyable experience with some really tight musicianship. A-. Number 9, Los Prisioneros, La Voz de 80. Please excuse me if I didn't pronounce that correctly. Don't kill me, Spanish speakers. Los Prisioneros was a revolutionary Latin rock band from Chile. All the musicianship here is super tight. What I really like is some of the biting commentary here, with me knowing just a little bit of Spanish. Lots of digs at Latin American tyrants. A-. Number 8, The Wallflowers, self-titled. Look at those reviews, right? Oh my goodness, this is gonna suck. 2 to 3 stars virtually across the board. And it's an hour long? Damn, I'm definitely gonna hate this thing. Much to my surprise, this ended up being my second favorite Wallflowers album. It may not be immediately lovable like certain moments off of Bringing Down the Horse. It might have some of the Wallflowers' longest tracks. It might have some low-end production, but this thing packs a punch. I really like how raw the vocals sound on here, because they didn't overdub Jacob Dylan's voice. It reminds me of those early Evanescence demos, or I Brought You My Bullets, You Brought Me Your Love by My Chemical Romance. It might sound raw and thin, but there's a certain beauty to that. We're so used to hearing these artists all polished up and pretty, just hearing their voices as they sound without all the added thick texture. And of course the instrumentals are pretty frail as well. But what this album has that the others don't are moments of extreme and passionate intensity. You truly believe it when Jacob Dylan just utters the line, "Oh my god, they sold Hollywood." I love almost every single track off of here. There's a couple of them that are just a little too nursery rhymey for me in the lyrical department, but the highs are just so high here. And I was genuinely surprised as this album continued to grow on me with each subsequent listen. Hi, video editing Randy from the future here. Yeah, that album gets an A-. I don't know why, but my camera just kind of shut off on me for a few seconds and it missed that pretty crucial line there. Number 7, Soda Stereo's Signos. Man, over the past few months, I've been really getting into the music of Gustavo Cerati. He was a famous Argentinian singer and guitarist. He got his start in this band, Soda Stereo. And let me tell you, this thing, it's fucking great. From the bombastic 80s production and the use of brass and other instruments, to the mighty and amazing voice of Cerati himself. The production sounds crystal clear on this thing. Probably some of the best production out of all the albums I have listed here. This was their seminal album of the 1980s. And of course, you can't forget that stellar fucking guitar work. Just an overall standout album. I'm aware they've done better than this, but as far as this decade goes, it's their best work. A. Number 6, Con, Subtle Meditations. Okay, so this one was recommended to me by my good friend Charlie, who can scream like nobody's business. Con stands for knowledge above all nonsense. And of course, he strives for that in his music while also making good music. Man, this is one of the most underrated underground rappers right now. He's famous enough to have his own Wikipedia article, but his albums don't get Wikipedia articles. And this was recommended to me as a good starting off point, and man, what a starting off point it is. First off, the beats on this thing. This has definitely got a retro 90s sound. In 90s era hip-hop already had a retro 70s and 60s and 50s jazz sound going for it. It's just cool seeing an era becoming nostalgic for an era that was nostalgic for something else. But these beats, they're incredible, and they play along perfectly with the lyrical prowess and intense nature of Con. I love how frail Con's voice can sound, because when he goes rapping about his mental problems and him having to live in poverty, you can definitely hear the struggle in his voice and the passion. And let's not forget the fact that this man can change his rhythm on the flip of a dime. This was recommended to me by Charlie because I went to go see Alone live last month. And let me tell you, you can definitely see where Con was likely influenced by AC. This is just an impressive album from start to finish. Give it a shot, and I look forward to looking into the rest of this guy's work. Alright, last break time. Are you looking for a new YouTuber to watch that isn't Dusty Smith? Do you like classic film? Are you looking to expand your taste in classic cinema? Or do you just like listening to people discuss movies or the history of movies? Well, check out One Too Many. He does videos of top 10s and top 20s of various years in cinema history. He's covered everything from the 1910s through the 1920s, all the way up into the 1990s, the 2000s, and he's even finished the 2010s and the 2020s. He's just wrapping up the late 90s. I figure he'll probably go finish up the 2000s after that. And he just gives a very good timestamp and very good recommendations for film. Highly recommend him. Check him out. End of story. Number 5. P Model, In a Model Room. Love Japanese music? This will be right up your alley. Love Japanese music that sounds like it comes from the 2000s, but it was written back in the late 70s? This will be even more up your alley. P Model were a Japanese new wave band that did the bulk of their music from the late 1970s up through the 80s. They were known for revolutionizing synthesizer sounds and production. They were able to write aggressive, punky rock music without the synthesizers sounding like it was holding anything back. And we're talking about being able to play full-blown melodies on synthesizers. This ain't parallel lines where they're just holding on to chords. These synth lines are interacting with the rest of the music very actively. You wouldn't hear stuff like this very often until the mid-1980s. What's even cooler is that some of these guys even went on to do soundtracks to some of your favorite anime. I'm not kidding. Look it up. You'll be very interested. A+. Number 4, Lene Lovich, Stateless. This is a new wave / goth rock album that likes to play around with several different stylings and does so excellently. Lovich is one of the weirder icons from the new wave era, but she's also one of the most charismatic. She's got the voice and the versatility of an opera singer. Lovich is an icon in new wave and definitely wrote some amazingly catchy and passionate music, especially the track Tonight, which sounds like it would belong on Bat Out of Hell with the way the thick vocal melodies and the operatic delivery would make you feel. Overall, one of the best albums I listened to this month, with only one weak track on it, keeping it out of the S tier. A+. Gurumul Jarimiri. Gurumul is considered a national treasure in Australia, and for good reason. He used to be a main musician of influential indigenous rock band Yathu Yindi. But as the 2000s came, he started playing a bigger role within the band, and many people took note of his angelic singing voice. In the mid-2000s, he embarked on a solo career with the effort of trying to raise awareness of the struggles of indigenous people. All of his albums received critical acclaim across the board, including and especially this one, his final album, released posthumously. Tragically, he passed away and would never see it released, and it's considered his best for good reason. This is a fusion album between traditional Western classical music and the music of the indigenous people of Australia, as best preserved as possible, seeing as the culture of the indigenous people of Australia has been slowly dwindled away by oppression and erasure. There are so many gorgeous drones on here, shining, shimmering instrumentation. Gurumul's voice and his backing vocalists do an amazing job. They put you in a certain time and place. There's certain moments of musical dissonance on here that just completely sweep you away and sometimes even haunt you. Gurumul is not somebody to be reckoned with, and definitely a treasure in Australian musical history, and definitely someone to check into if you haven't heard of him. There's a few barriers for me holding this from an S tier, but I feel like the more I start to peel back the layers, I'll feel like this will be a classic for me. But for now, I give it an extremely strong A+. Alright, I'm gonna do something a little different here. This album struck a chord with me. As you guys probably know, I have always been something of an obsessive when it comes to the country of Australia. I don't know what it is. I love the scenery in the country. I love the accent. I always jokingly say that my understanding of Australian culture is kind of like that of a weeaboo's understanding of the country of Japan. Never been there. I only know anything about it from the consumption of media. But I've tried to educate myself as best as possible. Obviously, I've done my videos on Kylie Minogue and Midnight Oil, and I've tried to talk to like native Australians, but something very special happened to me about a year and a half ago. I haven't really gotten the chance to talk about it, and I'm not going to say who this person is because I don't want someone to try to identify her. And if she wants to say anything, I want her to be able to come forth on her own terms. I fell in love with an Australian woman back in late 2022, mid to late 2022, for a few weeks. While I was listening to this album, I started to remember things that she would say about music. She was a music lover just like myself, and she just had the most perfect way of describing music. She'd describe what I liked about the piece of music without me having to say it, because she'd feel the same thing. And she'd say something new that would blow me away. And she was an incredibly empathetic and amazing woman, really cared about mental health, really cared about connecting with people. Unfortunately, the distance did us in, and we couldn't keep it going. But I was just remembering how she would describe this and how she probably would have fallen in love with it. And it gave me a little bit of a sense of closure. It made me remember that time in my life where I fell in love with somebody and they fell in love with me. What was really special is that I didn't even have to try. I was just me. No effort, no having to excite or impress her. And I don't know if she's watching this or if she'll ever see it. I just want to say thank you. Not a day goes by that I don't miss you. Not a day goes by that I don't think of you. I know it sounds, and I do hope that this finds you in a good place. Been through my ups and downs, but you know me, I'm a stubborn bastard. I try to pull through and survive regardless. I hope that if there's like a second life, that our paths cross there, or that maybe our paths cross again in this life. And if they don't, I'll just be forever grateful for the time I had with them. I know some people might say that this sounds kind of pathetic. I have made some attempts to move on, and I will continue to move on, but I do think that there's some people that just stick with you. She taught me that I could love myself without having to try, and that when someone's right for you, they'll stick around. This album, which is like a celebration of life, reminded me that I felt alive for those 6 weeks that I knew you. And let's finish up this countdown because we got 2 more albums to go. Number 2, we finally finish up the Wallflowers review. And the best Wallflowers album is the second best album that I listened to this month, and that is Breach. Back when I was 10 years old, I got this album as a birthday gift from my mother. And while I couldn't fully wrap my head around this thing, I did love the songs like Sleepwalker and Murder 101. And as I got older, things started to make sense to me. But when I became a teenager, I got bullied for liking the Wallflowers, so you know how that goes. Eventually, I picked the Wallflowers back up in my 20s, and I listened to this album again, and I fell in love with it. This is Jakob Dylan at his best. And one thing I have not talked about when it comes to Dylan is his relationship to his father, which is, according to a 2005 interview, just fine, thank you very much. But one thing he definitely disliked was being compared to his father. And when you're the son of musical royalty, it seems almost inevitable that those comparisons are going to come. But let me tell you something, this album is Jakob Dylan taking those comparisons, throwing them away, and embracing who he is as a person. We start off with the first 3 tracks, Letters from the Wasteland, Hand Me Down, and Sleepwalk, all of which Jakob Dylan discusses his celebrity and how he feels like the true him is not known to the general public. He asks us, do we know him, or do we just know him as the son of Bob Dylan? And then the 4th track comes, I've Been Delivered, which is just a bomb drop. This is an electronic piece, and I just gotta ask, how is it in the ever-sweet loving mother of fuck that the electronic elements of Red Letter Days are just ass, yet this actually works? And the answer is because it still sounds like a Wallflowers song. It doesn't sound like it's something else. And the lyrics are amazing on there. He's telling his story. He's telling us who he is as Jakob Dylan. Whether we like it or not, this is the songwriter we will be listening to for the rest of the album. The next track, Witness, takes a classic Bob Dylan character who's in a pathetic scenario. And rather than leaving the pathetic character in reckless abandon, Jakob Dylan picks her up and puts her in an uplift. There's a line in that song that says, "You don't have to stand tall, but baby, you must stand up." In our darkest and most pathetic times, the most important thing we can do is move forward, even if it isn't with confidence. It's important that we take that step forward. And while I'm sure there were instances where Bob was inspiring, it never felt as profound and meaningful as it does when it comes out of the lips of Jakob. And there's nothing wrong with lyrical cynicism, it has its own place, but Jakob is not a cynic. As the album continues, we have plenty of more uplifting tracks and some bittersweet moments. Murder 101 has some stellar guitar and vocal work from Elvis Costello. Finally, we end the album with the track Birdcage. This time, the pathetic character is Jakob himself, having been scorned by a lover. And as he sings himself off with some stellar guitar work, you finally think that the album has come to an end. But then you get that dreaded late 90s, early 2000s trope. You know, where the CD's still playing, and it just ended. What the heck's about to happen? Uh-oh, it's the hidden track time. Yeah, these things. A lot of people hated these things. But this is one of those instances where not only does it work, but I think it's the greatest hidden track of all time. Baby Bird is a primal, emotional, beautiful track, and Jakob Dylan just wraps his arms around you and says everything's going to be okay, and flies you off into the sunsets. I have seen fans sing this song teary-eyed at live shows, and I highly think it's one of the best Wallflowers tracks in existence. Breach is a triumph of an album with an evolution of songwriting that we haven't seen from very many artists. And now time for my number 1. Last year I started listening to some of the critically acclaimed albums from 2023 to see if I could find my album of the year. And it was the first time I've had an album of the year in a long time. Ladies and gentlemen, my number 1 best album that I listened to in the month of March of 2024 is Desire, I Want to Turn Into You by Carolyn Palachek. I have not been able to stop listening to this thing for the past 4 months. This album feels like it was custom tailor-made for me. Do you like female-made pop music from the past 40 years? Well, odds are you're gonna find something here that you like. If you like the new age textures of Enya, the jazzy beats of Dido, the glitchy substances of Grimes, or the glitz and glamour of Kylie Minogue, you have everything you like all wrapped up in a pretty little package. Those of you that think that Impossible Princess by Kylie Minogue was not considered important, well, listen to this because you can hear the fingerprints all over it. And of course, Carolyn Palachuk has a lot to offer of her own personality. This album is an impassioned scream to feel something in a world that feels like it's becoming more and more distant from itself. I'm running out of time on my camera, so I can't really go into much more detail. Definitely check this thing out. There are so many great tracks on here. One that I will definitely give a shout out to is I Believe, which is a heartfelt tribute to pop star Sophie, who tragically fell to her death by accident back in 2019. And Palachuk was heartbroken and was a close friend of hers. Is an amazing record, highly recommended. Please check it out. S tier, the best of the month. Sorry to have to kind of rush this out, but I'm running out of space on this second memory card, and god damn it, my feet are getting tired. I will see you guys next month. Please be sure to leave some recommendations in the comments, and maybe if they catch my eye, I'll include them in my video. See you later.